in the mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through the wind and every shadow could hide an enemy. The Navy SEALs thought they knew everything about warfare. They had trained for years, mastered every weapon, and faced the most dangerous missions on Earth. But on that scorching afternoon in 2018, as bullets rained down from hidden positions and their brothers fell around them, they discovered something that would shake their understanding of combat forever. What they didn't know was that among them walked someone whose hands had never trembled while taking a life from over a mile away. Someone whose eyes could spot movement that others missed entirely. Someone who had already killed more enemy combatants than most soldiers would see in their entire careers. The SEALs didn't know she was a sniper. They were about to find out in the most spectacular way possible. In 15 minutes that felt like a lifetime, 8 enemy snipers would fall silent forever. The tide of battle would turn completely, and the most elite fighting force in the world would witness precision shooting that defied everything they thought they knew about marksmanship. This is the true story of Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun, a woman whose secret past collided with present danger in the mountains of Afghanistan, creating a moment of warfare so extraordinary that it's still discussed in military circles today. It's a story of deception, survival, and the devastating power of a perfectly aimed bullet when everything hangs in the balance. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Chapman as Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun adjusted her gear for what seemed like another routine intelligence-gathering mission. The 28-year-old communications specialist had been deployed to Afghanistan for 6 months, and, to everyone around her, she was just another support soldier keeping the complex machinery of modern warfare running smoothly. Chun moved through her morning routine with the same quiet efficiency that had marked her entire military career. She checked her radio equipment twice, cleaned her standard-issue M4 carbine, and reviewed the mission briefings with the methodical attention that had earned her respect among her peers. What none of them knew was that every movement, every check, every seemingly mundane task was performed by hands that had once been among the most feared in a very different kind of warfare. The mission briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-operation tension. Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez, the SEAL team leader, spread topographical maps across the metal table while his men gathered around. Team members like Petty Officer Marcus Williams and Chief Petty Officer David Thompson had worked with Chun on several previous missions, but they knew her only as the reliable communications operator who kept them connected to base command. Chun took her usual position near the back of the room, her slight frame and quiet demeanor making her nearly invisible among the larger, more imposing special operations personnel. She listened as Rodriguez outlined their objective, a reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on Taliban movements in the Kunar Province Valley. Intelligence reports suggested increased enemy activity in the region, but nothing that should require more than standard observation and reporting. What the intelligence reports didn't mention was that this valley had become home to some of the most skilled snipers the Taliban had recruited from across the region. Former hunters, experienced marksmen, and even some foreign fighters with professional military training had been positioned in the rocky outcroppings that overlooked every possible approach to the valley. They had been waiting patiently for exactly this kind of American patrol to venture into their carefully prepared killing ground. As the team prepared to depart, Chun performed her final equipment checks with the same careful attention she always showed. Her radio gear was secured in specially designed pouches that would protect the sensitive electronics from the rough handling inevitable during mountain operations. Her medical supplies were arranged in the precise order that would allow her to access any item quickly, even in complete darkness. Her ammunition was distributed across multiple magazines, each loaded with the exact same type of rounds to ensure consistent performance. What her teammates couldn't see was the way Chun's fingers lingered slightly longer on her rifle than necessary, or how her eyes automatically tracked to the high ground visible through the briefing room windows. These were habits ingrained through years of different kind of training, muscle memory from a time when her life had depended on noticing things that others missed entirely. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was routine, the kind of transport mission that Chun had experienced dozens of times before. She sat quietly among the SEALs, monitoring radio traffic and ensuring their communications equipment remained functional despite the vibration and noise of the aircraft. The men around her joked and maintained the casual banter that helped them deal with pre-mission stress, but Chen remained focused on her instruments. From the helicopter's windows, the Afghan landscape stretched endlessly below them. The mountains rose like ancient guardians, their peaks still covered with snow despite the summer heat in the valleys. The terrain was beautiful and deadly in equal measure, offering countless hiding places for anyone who knew how to use the ground to their advantage. Chen studied the approaching valley with eyes that automatically calculated ranges, identified potential firing positions, and noted the wind patterns revealed by the movement of dust and vegetation. The insertion itself went smoothly. The helicopter settled into a small clearing just long enough for the team to disembark before lifting off again, disappearing into the distance with the familiar rhythmic beat of rotor blades fading into silence. Within moments, the team had spread into a defensive perimeter, each man taking a position that would provide security while they oriented themselves and began their movement toward the target area. Chen immediately began establishing communications with base camp, her voice calm and professional as she reported their safe insertion and confirmed their planned route. Her radio procedures were flawless, the result of extensive training and experience in maintaining communications under difficult conditions. But even as she spoke into her headset, part of her attention was focused on the surrounding terrain, noting details that her official role didn't require her to observe. The team began their movement through the valley, following a route that would keep them concealed while providing the best vantage points for their reconnaissance mission. Rodriguez set a steady pace, fast enough to reach their objective on schedule, but careful enough to avoid making noise that might alert any enemy forces in the area. The men moved with the fluid coordination of a team that had trained and worked together extensively, each person understanding their role and how it fit into the larger mission. Chen took her position in the middle of the formation, where her communications equipment could reach every team member while being protected by the combat specialists around her. She monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, maintaining contact with base command while keeping track of other friendly forces operating in the region. The steady stream of reports and updates flowing through her headset painted a picture of the larger tactical situation beyond their immediate area. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature began to drop, and the air grew thinner. The team's physical conditioning allowed them to maintain their pace despite the challenging conditions, but Chen noticed how the altitude affected radio signal strength and adjusted her equipment accordingly. She had learned through experience that successful communications required constant attention to changing environmental factors. The first indication of enemy presence came not from visual contact or intelligence reports, but from something much more subtle. Chen noticed a brief interruption in the radio chatter from a patrol operating several kilometers to the north. The interruption lasted only a few seconds, but it was followed by an unusual period of radio silence that made her instincts stir with unease. She mentioned the anomaly to Rodriguez during their next scheduled communication check, her report delivered in the same professional tone she used for all routine information. Rodriguez acknowledged her report, but didn't consider it particularly significant. Radio problems were common in the mountains, and brief communication interruptions were often caused by terrain or equipment issues rather than enemy action. But Chen's unease continued to grow as they moved deeper into the valley. Small details that others might have dismissed began to form a pattern in her mind. The absence of birds in areas where they should have been active, the way dust seemed to hang in the air at certain elevations, suggesting recent movement, the placement of rocks and vegetation that looked almost natural but showed subtle signs of deliberate arrangement. When she tried to articulate these concerns to Rodriguez during their next halt, she found herself in the difficult position of explaining observations that went beyond her official role. How could a communications specialist justify her attention to tactical details that were supposed to be the responsibility of the combat specialists? How could she explain that her unease was based on skills and experience that officially didn't exist? Rodriguez listened to her concerns with the patience of a leader who had learned to pay attention when his team members reported anything unusual, even if they couldn't fully explain their reasoning. But he also had to balance her warnings against the broader mission requirements and the intelligence assessments that suggested only minimal enemy presence in their area of operations. The team continued their advance toward the target area, moving through terrain that grew increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the mountains. The rocky outcroppings provided excellent concealment for their movement, but Chen couldn't shake the feeling that the same terrain features that protected them could just as easily hide enemy forces with hostile intentions. As afternoon approached and the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the team reached the ridge line that would provide them with observation of their target area. Rodriguez called a halt while he and his senior team members moved forward to reconnoiter their final approach. Chen remained with the rest of the team, maintaining communications and monitoring the radio frequencies for any changes in the tactical situation. It was during this pause that Chen noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the distance, barely visible through her binoculars, she could see what looked like a small flash of reflected light from a rocky outcropping approximately 800 meters away. The flash lasted only a split second, but it was exactly the kind of reflection that could come from a rifle scope or binoculars being adjusted by someone watching their position. Chen immediately reported her observation to Rodriguez, who had just returned from his reconnaissance of their final approach route. This time, her voice carried a note of urgency that got his immediate attention. Rodriguez moved to her position and scanned the area she had indicated, but by the time he was able to focus on the location, whatever had caused the reflection had either moved or been concealed. The team leader faced a difficult decision. Chen's warning could indicate the presence of enemy observers, which would make their mission significantly more dangerous. But it could also be a false alarm caused by natural phenomena or equipment malfunction. Their mission timeline was tight, and any delay would affect other operations depending on the intelligence they were supposed to gather. The attack began without warning, just as the most devastating ambushes always do. Rodriguez had just raised his binoculars to scan the target area when the first shot cracked through the afternoon air, the sound echoing off the valley walls like thunder. Chief Petty Officer Thompson, who had been moving between two large boulders, suddenly spun and dropped behind cover, crimson spreading across his left shoulder. Chaos erupted instantly. The carefully planned reconnaissance mission transformed into a fight for survival as more shots rang out from multiple directions. The enemy snipers had positioned themselves perfectly, creating interlocking fields of fire that covered every possible escape route from the killing zone. Each shot was precisely aimed, calculated to wound rather than kill, forcing the Americans to expose themselves while trying to help their injured teammates. Chun felt her training from another life surge back to consciousness as she instinctively assessed the tactical situation. While the SEAL team members around her scrambled for cover and tried to identify the source of the incoming fire, her eyes were already tracking the muzzle flashes and calculating ranges. Years of different training had taught her to remain calm under fire, to process information that others missed, and to identify opportunities that existed for only seconds at a time. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos as he coordinated his team's response to the ambush. His commands were calm and precise despite the immediate danger, reflecting the leadership skills that had made him one of the most respected special operations officers in his unit. He called for immediate medical attention for Thompson while directing his other team members to establish defensive positions among the rocky outcroppings. Petty Officer Williams low-crawled to Thompson's position, his medical training taking over as he began assessing the extent of the injury. The bullet had struck Thompson's shoulder at an angle, creating a deep furrow through muscle and tissue but missing the major blood vessels that could have made the wound immediately life-threatening. Williams applied pressure to control bleeding while calling out his assessment to Rodriguez. Chun maintained her communications equipment while appearing to follow standard protocol for support personnel under fire. She reported their situation to base command, requesting immediate extraction and medical support for their wounded team member. But even as she spoke into her radio, part of her attention was focused on details that her official role didn't require her to notice. The enemy snipers were good, better than most American forces had encountered in Afghanistan. Their positioning showed professional military training rather than the hasty preparations of typical insurgent fighters. Each firing position had been selected to provide multiple escape routes, and overlapping coverage of the target area. The timing of their initial volley indicated careful coordination and extensive preparation. What troubled Chen most was the precision of the shots. Thompson's wound had been perfectly placed to disable him without causing immediate death, forcing his teammates to expose themselves during rescue attempts. This wasn't random violence or poorly aimed harassment fire. This was the work of marksmen who understood exactly what they were doing and had planned every aspect of their attack. A second shot cracked across the valley, striking the rock face inches from Williams's head and showering him with stone fragments. The bullet's impact point told Chen several important things about the shooter's position and capabilities. The angle of impact suggested elevation and distance. The timing relative to the first shot indicated at least two separate firing positions. Most importantly, the precision suggested professional training and high-quality equipment. Rodriguez had reached the same conclusion through his own tactical assessment. He coordinated his team's movement to better defensive positions while calling for close air support and artillery strikes on the suspected enemy positions. But the rocky terrain that provided excellent concealment for the Taliban snipers also made it nearly impossible to identify exact target locations for supporting fires. The third enemy shot struck Williams in the leg as he tried to drag Thompson to better cover. The impact threw him off balance, and he tumbled behind a boulder with blood streaming from a deep graze across his thigh. Now 2 of the 4 combat specialists were wounded, and the tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating. Chen watched Williams apply a field dressing to his own wound with hands that trembled slightly from shock and adrenaline. Thompson remained conscious, but was growing pale from blood loss despite Williams's earlier medical treatment. Rodriguez and the remaining unwounded team member, Petty Officer Davis, were pinned down by accurate fire from positions they couldn't locate precisely enough to return effective fire. Standard military doctrine called for Chen to remain in her designated position, maintain communications with higher headquarters, and avoid actions that might compromise her primary mission of supporting the team's command and control capabilities. But standard doctrine hadn't anticipated a situation where the combat specialists were systematically being picked off by enemy marksmen who clearly understood exactly how to conduct this type of engagement. Chen made a decision that would reveal everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden. During a brief lull in the enemy fire, she moved to where Rodriguez was trying to coordinate their defense. Her voice remained calm and professional, but her words carried an authority that surprised the team leader. She told Rodriguez that she had identified at least 4 separate enemy firing positions based on muzzle flash analysis and bullet impact patterns. More importantly, she believed she could neutralize the threat if he could provide covering fire and accept responsibility for her deviation from standard communications specialist protocols. Rodriguez stared at Chen for several seconds, trying to reconcile her quiet demeanor and support role with the tactical knowledge she was demonstrating. Under normal circumstances, he would have questioned her assessment and maintained standard operational procedures. But circumstances were far from normal, and his team was facing destruction unless something changed quickly. Chen's explanation of enemy positions was detailed and precise in ways that went far beyond what any communications specialist should have been able to observe. She described firing angles, estimated ranges, and predicted movement patterns with the confidence of someone who had spent years studying these exact tactical problems. Her analysis suggested capabilities that her official military record didn't reflect. While Rodriguez considered Chen's proposal, another enemy shot struck the radio antenna she had been using to maintain contact with base command. The precision of the shot was clearly intentional, designed to isolate the American team and prevent them from calling for the support that might allow them to escape the trap. The enemy snipers understood modern military tactics well enough to target command and control capabilities systematically. Rodriguez realized that conventional responses to their situation were failing. His team's standard training and equipment were proving inadequate against enemies who had prepared this engagement with professional skill and patience. Williams and Thompson needed immediate medical attention that would be impossible to provide while under accurate sniper fire. Davis was running low on ammunition after returning fire at targets he couldn't precisely locate. Chun repeated her assessment of the tactical situation and her belief that she could change the balance of the engagement. This time, her voice carried a note of urgency that reflected her understanding of how quickly their situation was deteriorating. She told Rodriguez that every minute of delay made their position worse and reduced the likelihood that any of them would survive long enough for extraction. The decision Rodriguez faced was unlike anything in his extensive special operations experience. Standard procedure required him to maintain his team's assigned roles and capabilities while coordinating with higher headquarters for appropriate support. But standard procedure assumed that his team's official capabilities would be adequate for the threats they encountered. Chen's assessment suggested that she possessed skills and knowledge that weren't reflected in her official military occupation specialty. If she was correct about her ability to neutralize the enemy threat, deviating from standard procedure could save his team's lives. If she was wrong, her attempt might expose her to enemy fire while compromising their already difficult defensive position. Rodriguez's combat experience had taught him to trust his instincts when official procedures weren't adequate for the situations he faced. Chen's behavior under fire suggested training and experience that went far beyond her role as a communications specialist. Her tactical analysis was more accurate and detailed than what he was getting from his own combat specialists. Rodriguez made his decision. He told Chun that she had authorization to engage enemy targets if she believed she could do so effectively. He would coordinate covering fire and attempt to suppress enemy positions while she maneuvered to wherever she needed to be. His decision carried risks for everyone involved, but maintaining their current situation guaranteed that more team members would be wounded or killed. Chun acknowledged Rodriguez's authorization with the same Chun moved through the rocky terrain with a fluidity that seemed impossible given the difficult ground and the constant threat of enemy observation. Her approach to the first firing position demonstrated movement techniques that were clearly the result of extensive specialized training. Every step was calculated to avoid disturbing loose rocks or creating shadows that might alert enemy spotters. Her breathing remained controlled despite the physical demands of climbing over rough terrain while carrying full equipment. Rodriguez watched Chen's movement through his binoculars when tactical conditions allowed, trying to understand how a communications specialist had developed skills that surpassed many of the special operations personnel he had worked with during his career. Her route selection showed intimate understanding of how to use terrain features for concealment while maintaining the mobility necessary for rapid position changes. The first enemy sniper position was approximately 400 meters from Chen's starting point, located in a rocky outcropping that provided excellent observation of the valley floor. The Taliban marksman had selected his position well, with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes. What he hadn't anticipated was that his carefully chosen hiding place could be approached from above using a route that would be invisible from his observation angle. Chen's climb to the high ground required nearly 8 minutes of careful movement across terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers under normal conditions. The combination of loose rock, steep angles, and the need for absolute silence made every movement a calculated risk. But her progress was steady and purposeful, suggesting familiarity with this type of approach that went far beyond what any standard military training would provide. During her approach, Chen maintained awareness of her team's situation through her radio earpiece. She could hear Rodriguez coordinating their defensive efforts while monitoring Thompson's medical condition. Williams had managed to stop the bleeding from his leg wound and was providing covering fire despite his injury. Davis continued to scan for targets while conserving ammunition for opportunities when enemy positions could be clearly identified. The Taliban snipers had settled into a patient routine of occasional harassment fire designed to prevent the Americans from improving their position or attempting escape. Their shooting patterns suggested confidence in their tactical advantage and willingness to wait for perfect shot opportunities rather than wasting ammunition on hasty engagements. This patience was typical of experienced hunters, but it would prove to be a fatal error against an opponent they hadn't anticipated. Chun reached her first attack position after careful study of the enemy sniper's behavior and firing pattern. From her elevated position, she could observe his location without being visible from his angle of view. More importantly, she could see details about his equipment, position, and routine that would allow her to plan an engagement with minimal risk of detection or failure. The enemy marksman was equipped with a precision rifle that appeared to be of Russian manufacture, probably a Dragunov or similar weapon system. His position showed evidence of careful preparation, with ammunition organized for rapid access and alternative firing positions prepared for different. Most significantly, he was alone, which meant his elimination would create an immediate gap in the enemy's coordinated fire plan. Chen's rifle had been modified with personal equipment that she had acquired through unofficial channels during her deployment. The scope was of higher quality than standard issue, calibrated for the specific ballistics of her chosen ammunition. Her shooting position had been selected to provide the stability necessary for precision fire while offering immediate concealment after the shot. The engagement began with Chen's careful observation of her target's routine. The enemy sniper fired approximately every 3 to 4 minutes, scanning between shots for new target opportunities. His pattern was regular enough to predict, but random enough to avoid creating a precise schedule that could be exploited by counter-snipers who might be observing his position. Chen's first shot was fired during the brief moment when her target was focused on adjusting his rifle scope between firing opportunities. The bullet struck him in the upper chest, the impact spinning him away from his weapon and ending his threat permanently. The suppressor on Chen's rifle reduced the sound signature significantly, but the distinctive crack of a high-velocity bullet breaking the sound barrier still echoed across the valley. Rodriguez heard the shot, but couldn't determine its source or target immediately. What he did notice was that the harassment fire from one of the enemy positions stopped abruptly. The tactical situation had shifted in some way, but the remaining enemy snipers continued their engagement pattern without obvious changes in their behavior. Chen immediately began movement toward her second target position. The enemy snipers would eventually realize that one of their number had been eliminated, and their response would likely include attempts to locate and neutralize whoever was responsible. Her advantage lay in mobility and the element of surprise, but both advantages would diminish rapidly once the enemy understood they were facing counter-sniper operations. The second enemy position was located approximately 600 meters from the first, requiring Chen to traverse some of the most difficult terrain in the valley. Her route took her along a ridge line that was partially exposed to observation from several directions. Movement required perfect timing to coincide with natural cover from wind-blown dust and changing light conditions. During this movement, Chen's radio discipline remained perfect despite the physical demands of her approach. She provided brief position updates to Rodriguez without compromising her operational security or revealing details that enemy radio intercept might exploit. Her communications were professional and calm, giving no indication of the extraordinary nature of what she was accomplishing. The second Taliban sniper had positioned himself in a natural cave formation that provided excellent protection from return fire and artillery strikes. His selection showed understanding of how American forces typically responded to sniper attacks, but the position's strengths also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by an attacker approaching from an unexpected direction. Chen's approach to the second position required different techniques than her first engagement. The terrain didn't allow for the elevated attack angle she had used previously. Instead, she was forced to approach at approximately the same elevation as her target, using rock formations and vegetation for concealment during her final approach. This engagement proved more challenging because the enemy sniper's position allowed him to observe approaches from multiple directions. Chen was forced to time her movement carefully, advancing only when his attention was focused on targets in the valley below. The approach required nearly 12 minutes of patient movement, with several periods of complete stillness when enemy observation swept past her position. Chen's second shot was more difficult than the first, requiring compensation for wind conditions and a more complex firing solution due to the angle and distance. She waited for the perfect moment when her target was silhouetted against the lighter background of the cave entrance. The shot was precise and immediate, eliminating the second threat before he could react or alert other enemy positions. Rodriguez began to understand that something extraordinary was happening when the second enemy firing position fell silent. Two of the Taliban snipers had stopped shooting within minutes of each other, and the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. His communication specialist was somehow neutralizing enemy threats that his trained combat specialists hadn't been able to locate precisely enough to engage effectively. The remaining 6 enemy snipers continued their engagement pattern, but Chen could detect subtle changes in their behavior that suggested growing awareness that their tactical situation had changed. Their firing rate increased slightly, and they began using different positions within their prepared areas. Most significantly, she observed 2 of them using radio communications more frequently than before. Chen's movement toward the 3rd target position was complicated by the increased enemy alertness and the more open terrain she needed to cross. The approach required her to use techniques for concealed movement across open ground, skills that were clearly the result of extensive specialized training. Her progress was slower but remained methodical and purposeful. The 3rd enemy sniper occupied a position that was almost perfectly concealed from observation by American forces in the valley below. His location had been selected to provide firing opportunities while remaining invisible to return fire or airstrikes. What the enemy marksman hadn't considered was that his position could be observed and engaged from the high ground behind his location. Chen's approach to the 3rd position required climbing to an elevation that provided her with a clear view into the enemy's concealed firing position. The climb was physically demanding and exposed her to potential observation from other enemy locations, but it was the only approach angle that would allow effective engagement. During her climb, Chen could hear increased radio chatter from her own team as Rodriguez coordinated their defensive efforts. Thompson's medical condition was stable but required evacuation soon. Williams continued providing covering fire despite his wound. Davis had identified possible locations for some of the remaining enemy snipers, but couldn't engage them effectively from his current position. Chen's 3rd engagement was the most technically difficult shot she had attempted during the engagement. The target was partially concealed behind rock formations, requiring her to wait for movement that would provide a clear shot opportunity. The range was nearly 700 meters, and wind conditions at that elevation created additional complications for ballistic calculation. When the opportunity presented itself, Chen's shot was perfectly placed. The enemy sniper was eliminated instantly, creating another gap in the coordinated fire plan that was slowly unraveling as the Taliban marksmen realized they were facing an opponent whose capabilities exceeded their expectations. Rodriguez could now clearly identify the pattern of enemy positions being systematically eliminated. His communications specialist was conducting counter-sniper operations with a level of skill that defied explanation. 3 enemy firing positions had fallen silent in sequence, and the harassment fire that had pinned his team was diminishing significantly. Chen immediately began movement toward her next target, but the tactical situation was becoming more complex. The remaining enemy snipers were adapting to the threat they now recognized. Their communication patterns had changed, and she could observe increased movement between their prepared positions. The element of surprise that had enabled her first 3 engagements was diminishing rapidly. The 4th Taliban sniper position was located in terrain that required Chen to approach across open ground that would expose her to observation from multiple directions. The enemy marksman had selected his position to provide excellent observation of possible approach routes, creating a defensive advantage that would be difficult to overcome through conventional tactics. The remaining 4 Taliban snipers had abandoned their original engagement plan and were now actively hunting for the American counter-sniper who had systematically eliminated half their number. Chen could observe their movement patterns changing from defensive to aggressive as they attempted to locate and neutralize the threat that was destroying their carefully coordinated ambush. Rodriguez watched through his binoculars as enemy muzzle flashes appeared from new positions, indicating that the surviving Taliban marksmen were repositioning rapidly to better hunting locations. Their fire was no longer focused on pinning down his team, but was instead directed toward areas where they believed the American sniper might be concealed. The tactical situation had evolved from an ambush into a deadly game of hide and seek among the rocky outcroppings. Chen understood that her advantages of surprise and concealment were diminishing with each engagement. The enemy snipers were experienced hunters who would learn from each elimination and adapt their tactics accordingly. Her movement between positions was becoming more dangerous as the Taliban marksmen focused their attention on likely approach routes and firing positions. The fifth target proved to be the most challenging yet, because the enemy sniper had moved from his original position to a location that provided better observation of the high ground where Chun had been operating. His new position was selected specifically to counter the tactics she had been using, demonstrating professional military training and tactical flexibility that exceeded typical insurgent capabilities. Chin's approach to the fifth position required her to abandon the elevated attack angles she had been using and instead close to much shorter range across dangerous open ground. The Taliban sniper's new location provided him with excellent observation of longer-range approach routes, forcing Chin to accept significantly increased risk in order to achieve an effective firing position. During her approach, Chin could hear radio chatter indicating that her own team's situation continued to improve. Thompson's bleeding had been controlled, and his medical condition was stable enough for delayed evacuation. Williams was providing effective covering fire despite his leg wound. Davis had moved to a better position that allowed him to observe some of the remaining enemy locations. The terrain Chin needed to cross consisted of loose rock and sparse vegetation that would provide minimal concealment from enemy observation. Her movement required perfect timing to coincide with natural distractions and enemy attention focused in other directions. Each meter of progress involved calculated risks that would have been rejected under normal tactical conditions. Chin's engagement with the fifth enemy sniper occurred at a range of less than 300 meters, close enough that any missed shot would immediately reveal her position to other enemy forces in the area. The shot required her to fire from an unstable position while partially exposed to return fire. Her marksmanship skills were tested to their limits as she calculated wind effects, target movement, and ballistic drop under time pressure that allowed no margin for error. The fifth enemy marksman was eliminated with a single shot that struck him as he was scanning for targets through his rifle scope. The precision of Chin's shooting under such difficult conditions demonstrated a level of skill that went far beyond what standard military training could provide. Her success under pressure indicated experience with similar situations that her official military record didn't reflect. Rodriguez realized that his communications specialist was conducting the most effective counter-sniper operation he had witnessed during his entire military career. 5 enemy positions had been systematically eliminated by someone whose official qualifications suggested no capability for this type of warfare. Chin's performance was rewriting his understanding of what was possible in precision shooting under combat conditions. The 6th Taliban sniper had positioned himself to provide overwatch for his remaining teammates while they attempted to locate and engage the American counter-sniper. His location offered excellent observation of the areas where Chun had been operating, but it also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone willing to accept extreme risk during the approach. Chin's movement toward the 6th position required her to cross terrain that would expose her to observation from multiple directions. The approach was so dangerous that conventional military doctrine would have classified it as unacceptable risk for any potential tactical gain. But conventional doctrine hadn't anticipated the extraordinary capabilities Chun was demonstrating. The 6th engagement required Chun to fire while moving across exposed terrain, using techniques that combine marksmanship with tactical movement in ways that suggested training far beyond what any standard military program provided. Her shot was fired from a position that offered no stability or concealment, relying entirely on skill and experience to achieve the precision necessary for immediate target elimination. Chin's success in eliminating the 6th enemy sniper while exposed to return fire from other positions demonstrated abilities that challenged everything Rodriguez thought he understood about military training and capabilities. Her movement and shooting techniques were unlike anything in standard special operations training programs, suggesting background and experience that went far beyond her official qualifications. Davis watched in amazement as Chun continued her systematic elimination of enemy threats despite facing increasingly dangerous tactical conditions. Her performance was providing his team with opportunities to improve their position and provide better medical care for their wounded members. Most importantly, Her success was creating the conditions necessary for eventual extraction from their desperate situation. The 7th Taliban sniper had observed enough of Chin's previous engagements to understand that he was facing an opponent with exceptional capabilities. His repositioning efforts focused on creating a defensive position that would be difficult to approach while providing him with observation of likely attack routes. His tactics showed professional training and experience with counter-sniper operations. Chin's approach to the 7th position required her to use deception and misdirection rather than concealment and stealth. The enemy sniper's defensive preparations made conventional approaches too dangerous to attempt. Instead, Chin created false indicators of her presence in one location while actually attacking from an entirely different direction. The tactical complexity of engaging the 7th target required Chun to coordinate multiple phases of deception while maintaining awareness of the 8th enemy sniper's location and capabilities. Her plan involved creating distractions that would focus enemy attention away from her actual approach route, while timing her movement to exploit brief windows of opportunity. Chin's elimination of the 7th enemy sniper required her most complex shooting solution of the entire engagement. The target was partially concealed behind protective cover, requiring her to calculate bullet trajectory through multiple obstacles while compensating for wind effects and target movement. The shot demanded perfect timing and execution under conditions that left no room for error. Rodriguez could hardly believe what he was observing as the 7th enemy position fell silent. His communications specialist was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded those of the most highly trained special operations snipers he had worked with during his career. Chin's performance was systematically dismantling an enemy force that had been positioned to achieve tactical superiority through careful preparation and professional execution. The 8th and final Taliban sniper represented the greatest challenge because he had observed Chin's tactics throughout the engagement and had positioned himself accordingly. His location was selected to provide observation of multiple approach routes while offering maximum protection from return fire. Most significantly, he was equipped with communications gear that he was using to coordinate with other enemy forces in the broader area. Chun understood that the 8th engagement would determine whether her team could be extracted safely or whether they would face renewed attack from reinforcing enemy units. The final Taliban sniper was positioned to direct supporting fires and coordinate additional forces that were reportedly moving toward their location. His elimination was essential for their survival. The approach to the 8th position required Chun to cross the most dangerous terrain she had encountered during the entire engagement. The enemy sniper's location provided him with observation of every reasonable approach route, forcing her to accept risks that conventional military training would consider unacceptable. Her movement required perfect execution under conditions where any mistake would result in immediate detection and engagement by a highly skilled opponent. The helicopter extraction arrived 38 minutes after Chun had eliminated the final enemy sniper, but those minutes passed with an eerie silence that none of the team members had experienced before. The valley that had been echoing with gunfire was now completely quiet except for the wind moving through the rocky outcroppings and the distant sound of rotor blades approaching their position. Rodriguez used the waiting time to coordinate with medical personnel and brief the extraction team on their tactical situation. Thompson's condition remained stable but required immediate hospital care for proper treatment of his shoulder wound. Williams's leg injury was less serious, but still needed medical attention beyond what field dressings could provide. Both wounded men would require priority evacuation. During the extraction preparation, Rodriguez found himself studying Chun with new eyes. The quiet communications specialist was performing her post-mission duties with the same methodical efficiency she had always shown, but everything about her seemed different now that he had witnessed her extraordinary capabilities. Her movements were precise and purposeful in ways that suggested training far beyond her official qualifications. Chun maintained perfect radio discipline as she coordinated the extraction helicopter's approach to their position. Her communications were professional and detailed, providing the pilots with all necessary information about landing zone conditions, enemy situation, and medical priorities. Nothing in her voice or demeanor suggested that she had just completed one of the most remarkable combat performances in recent military history. Davis assisted Williams with movement preparation while continually glancing at Chun with expressions of amazement and confusion. The systematic elimination of 8 enemy snipers in 15 minutes was beyond anything he had imagined possible, especially from someone whose job was supposedly limited to maintaining radio communications and providing administrative support. As the extraction helicopters settled into their landing zone, Chun secured her communications equipment with the same careful attention to detail she had always demonstrated. Her rifle was cleaned and secured according to standard procedures, giving no outward indication that it had just been used to conduct the most effective counter-sniper operation any of them had ever witnessed. The medical team immediately took charge of Thompson and Williams, providing professional care while preparing them for transport to the combat hospital. Both wounded men were conscious and stable, and their injuries were well within the capabilities of modern military medical care. The attack that could have resulted in multiple casualties had been contained through Chin's intervention. Rodriguez coordinated the team's movement to the extraction helicopters while maintaining security and ensuring that no sensitive equipment was left behind. His after-action procedures were automatic and thorough, but part of his attention remained focused on Chun and the questions her performance had raised about her background and qualifications. During the helicopter flight back to base, Chun resumed her standard duties as communications specialist, monitoring radio frequencies and maintaining contact with command elements. Her behavior was completely professional and unremarkable, giving no indication of the extraordinary skills she had just demonstrated under the most demanding combat conditions. Rodriguez spent the flight time trying to reconcile what he had observed with everything he knew about military training programs and specialty qualifications. Chin's marksmanship performance had exceeded anything he had seen from the most highly trained special operations snipers. Her tactical movement and target selection had demonstrated expertise that required years of specialized training and experience. The return to forward operating base Chapman was routine except for the medical priority given to Thompson and Williams. Both men were immediately transported to the base hospital for treatment, while the rest of the team went through standard post-mission procedures including equipment maintenance, debriefing sessions, and after-action report preparation. Chin's participation in the initial debriefing was limited to her official role as communications specialist. She provided detailed information about radio procedures, communication timelines, and equipment performance during the mission. Her reports were thorough and professional, but they contained no reference to her elimination of 8 enemy snipers or the extraordinary marksmanship skills she had demonstrated. Rodriguez faced the challenge of writing after-action reports that accurately described events that seemed impossible based on the official qualifications of his team members. Standard military reporting procedures required detailed accounts of combat actions, but Chin's performance challenged conventional understanding of what communications specialists were trained and authorized to do. The official version of events described successful counter-sniper operations conducted by the team as a whole, with credit distributed among all team members for their coordinated response to enemy contact. Chin's specific contributions were noted in terms of her communications support and tactical observations, but the reports avoided detailed description of her individual combat actions. 3 days after their return from the mission, Rodriguez requested a private meeting with Chun to discuss aspects of her performance that hadn't been covered in official debriefing sessions. The conversation took place in his office after normal duty hours, ensuring privacy for discussions that might involve sensitive information about Chin's background and qualifications. Chun acknowledged Rodriguez's questions about her combat performance with the same calm professionalism she had always demonstrated. When pressed for explanations about her marksmanship skills and tactical knowledge, she provided information that revealed the existence of a military background that wasn't reflected in her current assignment or official records. Rodriguez learned that Chun had served as a precision marksman with Army Special Operations units before transferring to her current communications role. Her sniper training had been conducted through programs that weren't widely known within the broader military community. Her combat experience included multiple deployments in roles that required the exact skills she had demonstrated during their recent mission. Chin explained that her transfer to communications specialist duties had been requested after she had completed her obligations for special operations assignments. Her decision to pursue a different military occupation specialty had been personal, and she had specifically requested assignments that wouldn't require her to use the marksmanship skills that had defined her previous military service. The conversation revealed that Chin's unremarkable performance as a communications specialist had been carefully cultivated to avoid attention and questions about her previous training and experience. She had worked deliberately to blend into support roles where her special operations background wouldn't be relevant or noticed by the people she worked with. Rodriguez understood that Chin's revelation explained everything about her performance during their recent mission while raising new questions about military assignment procedures and personnel management. Her combat skills had saved his team's lives, but her presence in a communications role suggested systemic issues with how the military utilized personnel with specialized training. Chin requested that Rodriguez maintain discretion about her background and previous training when completing his after-action reports and personnel evaluations. She explained that her transfer to support duties had been intended as a permanent change in her military career path, and she preferred to avoid reassignment to combat roles that would require her to use skills she was trying to leave behind. Rodriguez agreed to Chin's request while ensuring that his reports would accurately reflect her contributions to their mission success. The balance between recognizing her exceptional performance and respecting her privacy required careful attention to how events were described in official documentation. Over the following weeks, Chin returned to her routine duties as communications specialist with the same quiet efficiency she had always demonstrated. Her performance during the ambush became a topic of informal discussion among special operations personnel, but the details remained limited to those who had been present during the engagement. Rodriguez's leadership challenges included managing team members who now understood that their communications specialist possessed capabilities that exceeded those of most combat specialists. Chin's performance had changed team dynamics in ways that required ongoing attention to maintain unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. The broader implications of Chin's background and performance raised questions about military personnel policies and the efficient utilization of specialized training. Her case suggested that conventional assignment procedures might not adequately account for individuals with exceptional capabilities who preferred to serve in support rather than combat roles. 6 months later, Rodriguez received orders for a new assignment that would take him to different operational areas. His final evaluation of Chun emphasized her exceptional performance as communications specialist while noting her potential for expanded responsibilities should she choose to accept them. The report balanced recognition of her capabilities with respect for her career preferences. Chun continued serving as communications specialist with various special operations teams, maintaining her professional demeanor and avoiding situations that would require her to reveal the combat skills she possessed. Her performance during the Valley engagement remained known to a small group of military personnel who understood the importance of discretion regarding sensitive operational capabilities. Years later, military training institutions would study the tactics and marksmanship demonstrated during the engagement, but the identity of the individual responsible remained classified to protect operational security and personal privacy. The case became an example of how exceptional individual performance could influence tactical outcomes under the most challenging combat conditions. Rodriguez's career continued with assignments that built on his experience leading teams with diverse and sometimes hidden capabilities. His understanding of personnel management expanded to include appreciation for individuals whose backgrounds and skills might not be immediately apparent through official records and standard qualification assessments. Chin eventually completed her military service and transitioned to civilian life, where her previous experience remained a private part of her personal history. The 8 enemy snipers who had been eliminated in 15 minutes on that afternoon in Afghanistan represented the final combat application of skills that she had spent years developing and then deliberately chose to leave behind. The valley in the Kunar province returned to its natural quiet after the engagement, but the events that had taken place among its rocky outcroppings became part of military history. The story of what happened when 8 enemy snipers made the fatal mistake of engaging a team that included someone whose capabilities they never suspected continues to be told wherever precision warfare and exceptional individual performance are discussed. The SEALs learned that afternoon that they didn't know everything about warfare, and they discovered that sometimes the most dangerous person on the battlefield is the one who appears to be nothing more than a quiet professional doing an unremarkable job. Chin's performance reminded everyone present that combat effectiveness isn't always determined by official qualifications or apparent roles, and that extraordinary capabilities can exist in the most unexpected places. In 15 minutes that changed everything, a communications specialist had demonstrated why assumptions about military roles and capabilities can be deadly mistakes in the unforgiving environment of precision warfare. Chin's final engagement combined all the skills and techniques she had demonstrated throughout the afternoon. The shot required maximum precision under extreme time pressure, as the enemy sniper was actively scanning for targets and would detect her presence within seconds of her reaching a firing position. Her success would depend on perfect coordination of movement, positioning, and marksmanship under the most challenging conditions possible. The elimination of the 8th enemy sniper marked the completion of the most extraordinary display of precision shooting that any of the SEAL team members had ever witnessed. In 15 minutes that had seemed like hours, Chun had systematically destroyed an enemy force that had been positioned and equipped to achieve tactical superiority through careful preparation and professional execution. Rodriguez stared at his communications specialist as she made her way back to their defensive position, trying to reconcile what he had just observed with everything he thought he knew about military training and capabilities. Chin's performance had saved his team's lives while demonstrating skills that suggested background and experience far beyond what her official military record reflected. As Chun resumed her position with the team, her demeanor returned to the quiet professionalism that had characterized her behavior throughout their deployment. Her equipment was secured with the same careful attention to detail she had always shown. Her radio procedures remained flawless as she re-established communications with base command and requested immediate extraction for their wounded team members. What none of the team members realized was that they had just witnessed the combat application of skills that Chun had spent years trying to leave behind. The systematic elimination of 8 enemy snipers in 15 minutes represented the culmination of training and experience that officially didn't exist, applied under conditions that had required her to reveal capabilities she had hoped never to use again. The afternoon sun was beginning to set over the western peaks as extraction helicopters approached their position. The immediate tactical crisis was over, but questions about Chin's extraordinary performance were just beginning. Rodriguez faced the challenge of writing after-action reports that would accurately describe events that challenged everything he understood about military training and capabilities. Chun monitored radio traffic as their extraction was coordinated, her voice calm and professional as she provided the routine updates that her official role required. But the quiet communications specialist who had seemed so unremarkable during 6 months of deployment had just demonstrated why 8 enemy snipers should never have chosen to engage her team in precision warfare among the mountains of Afghanistan. Sealed approach routes. She coordinated her movement with natural events that would provide brief concealment, including wind-blown dust clouds and changing light conditions as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley. Her approach was opportunistic rather than methodical, requiring instant decision-making and perfect execution. The 4th engagement demonstrated Chin's ability to adapt her tactics to changing conditions. Rather than using a single precise shot, she fired twice in rapid succession to ensure target elimination despite the difficult shooting conditions. Both shots found their target, ending another threat and further degrading the enemy's coordinated fire plan. For enemy snipers had now been eliminated, and the tactical balance in the valley was shifting significantly. Rodriguez could observe his team's situation improving as the harassment fire decreased, and the remaining enemy positions became more defensive in their behavior. But for more Taliban marksmen remained active, and Chin's extraordinary performance was far from complete. All professionalism she had shown throughout her official duties. But now her movements changed completely. The quiet efficiency she had always demonstrated transformed into something much more focused and purposeful. She checked her rifle with hands that moved automatically through procedures that were clearly deeply ingrained through extensive practice. Davis watched in amazement as Chen's entire demeanor shifted from support personnel to something that looked much more like a predator preparing to hunt. Her examination of the surrounding terrain was methodical and thorough, noting details about wind patterns, lighting conditions, and available concealment that even experienced combat specialists might have missed. Chen told Rodriguez that she would need approximately 15 minutes to reach a position where she could engage all the identified enemy snipers effectively. She requested that he maintain their current defensive posture without attempting aggressive maneuvers that might alert the enemy to changes in the tactical situation. Most importantly, she asked him to trust her assessment and not question her methods until the engagement was concluded. Rodriguez agreed to Chen's timeline while internally questioning whether he was making the right decision. Allowing a communications specialist to attempt a solution that his combat specialists couldn't achieve seemed to contradict everything in his training and experience. But his team was facing systematic destruction, and conventional responses had proven inadequate against enemies who clearly understood advanced sniper tactics. As Chen prepared to begin her movement to an attack position, the afternoon sun continued its descent toward the western peaks. Shadows were lengthening across the valley floor, creating the lighting conditions that would either help her remain concealed during her approach or expose her to enemy observation. The next 15 minutes would determine whether Rodriguez's faith in his communications specialist was justified or whether his decision would cost more lives. What none of the team members realized was that Chen's careful movement away from their defensive position marked the beginning of a demonstration of marksmanship skills that would be studied and discussed in military training facilities for years afterward. The quiet communications specialist who had seemed so unremarkable during 6 months of routine operations was about to reveal why 8 enemy snipers had made a fatal error when they decided to engage her team in precision warfare. After consulting with his senior team members, Rodriguez decided to proceed with the mission, but with increased security measures. The team would move more slowly and carefully, with additional attention to potential threats from the surrounding high ground. Chen would monitor radio frequencies for any signs of enemy communications, while the combat specialists would maintain heightened awareness of their tactical environment. What none of them realized was that their position had been under observation since shortly after their insertion. The Taliban snipers positioned throughout the valley had been tracking their movement for hours, noting their route, their equipment, and, most importantly, their apparent capabilities. The enemy marksmen were experienced hunters who understood patience, and they had been waiting for the American patrol to move into the carefully prepared killing zone where their superior knowledge of the terrain would provide maximum advantage. The reflection Chen had spotted was just one small indicator of a much larger trap that was beginning to close around them. 8 highly skilled enemy snipers occupied concealed positions throughout the valley, each one equipped with precision rifles and trained to coordinate their fire for maximum effect. They had been preparing for this moment for weeks, studying the terrain and planning their fields of fire to ensure that once the engagement began, their targets would have nowhere to hide. As the American team continued their movement toward what they believed was a routine reconnaissance objective, they were actually walking into what would become one of the most intense sniper engagements of the entire Afghan conflict. The next few hours would test every skill they possessed and reveal capabilities that none of them knew existed within their own ranks. The sun continued its descent toward the western peaks, casting longer shadows across the valley floor and creating the perfect conditions for what was about to unfold. In 15 minutes that would seem like hours, the quiet afternoon would explode into violence that would change everything the SEAL team thought they knew about their communications specialist and about the true nature of precision warfare in the mountains of Afghanistan.